So almost every Hyrox competitor is afraid of lifting heavy. That's going to make them slow. So where do you stand at on that?
They should be lifting heavy. Like they need to, not just from like a tissue safety and health standpoint, but also from like, they need more fast twitch muscle fibers. They need to be able to move explosively in that triple extension. And if you avoid lifting heavy and you just run, like you're going to set yourself up for an injury and you're missing out on those training adaptations, right? Like Olympic lifting can be speed training.
Yeah. I think the way I describe it to people is, listen, it's not as if when you contract your muscles that 100% of the fibers activate immediately. Yeah. Your body's efficient. If it thinks it only needs 20% to get the job done, it's only going to use 20. How do we teach it to use more? Training. You teach it that you're going to do something heavy that I should probably use 85%. The same thing with power training. So it's super important. And, they shouldn't be scared of it at all.
Yeah. With like those Hyrox people, a lot of times they'll see those PRs and they see them on the track. I can't tell you the last time I saw like Hyrox people PRing their lifts ever.
Welcome back to another episode of the To Be Fit podcast. I'm your host, Brian Bott, and today joining me is Joe Sullivan, an online fitness coach and Hyrox competitor who specializes in strength training, sustainable nutrition, and helping busy people train smarter, not harder. Joe, welcome on, man.
Thank you for having me, brother.
So listen, you and I have been in contact with each other for a long time. Having conversations is not always easy. So I'm super excited to have you on. Give everybody, that isn't familiar with you here in Monmouth County. You're certainly the busiest person in fitness that I know, at least locally anyway. Give me a little background. How did we get to where you are now, working with people mostly online, but some in person as well?
Where do we start? I'm kidding. I'm not going to start at the beginning. That's too long of a story. But I moved home like 3 years ago, and that kind of really just fell into everything. I came home, like helped the folks out and stuff, and I was pretty much starting at zero. I had no contacts, no nothing out here. So I started working at a butcher shop, and then I found Sam Tooley working at the garage. He had Alpha Fit Club, but it wasn't to the extent of what it was today. So started coaching at the front desk, or working the front desk, coaching classes, still working at the butcher shop, looking for clients. And then kind of organically, as those two brands, the Garage Gym and Alpha Fit Club, grew, so did I, just because I just had more availability than other people. And then as Sam got out of coaching, he really kind of threw clients my way, thankfully. So then from there, that really kind of got the in-person mojo started. From there, just networking from classes, from being at 4 different of the Alpha Fit Club locations. And then from there, it just got too busy where in-person couldn't be sustainable, had to fall into something online. And I always kind of had something on the back burner, but it was never the priority until probably like a year and a half ago, where it was like, all right, now I have more time, focus, buying into doing things more online. And now I can happily say I have more people online than in person. And it's been like that for a little bit, and knock on wood, I can keep it that way.
Cause you had been training for a while though. Cause I remember, I don't think either one of us realized this, but we had a mutual contact.
Yeah.
Danny Two Guns. I remember him and I were both in, Alan and Rachel Cosgrove's like business group.
Yes.
So I would see him like maybe once a quarter out in LA. Like, so you were out, that's like Erie?
Yeah. Erie, PA.
What were you doing out there?
So I went out there for grad school.
Okay.
And then from there I just needed internships, right? Mm-hmm. So I went to grad school for exercise phys, but I didn't want to do any of the research stuff. So I just went strength and conditioning focused. I got an internship with the wrestling team, which was rad. And then I just needed more internship hours. Was introduced to, he had a business partner at the time, so it was Lewis Fitness and Performance. Mm-hmm. But the way my schedule worked with class, it just couldn't work with athletes. So it just happened that I worked for Two Guns. And then grad school was a year, and then probably stayed there for like another year and a half after that before I had to like move home and all things right before the pandemic. So that's pretty much where all things started. I learned a shitload from Dan.
Yeah, he's definitely a big X's and O's guy.
Oh my
I remember
God.
looking at some of his programs and like, I consider myself a pretty intelligent and informed coach. I'm looking at this sheet and I don't know when any of that is.
Yeah, dude, the acronyms are insane, and I still use them today.
Yeah, he'd have a crazy list of like, I'm like, all I know is I need a sandbag, a band, and I'm breathing some way. But yeah, so all right, so fast forward coming through now, like who do you work with primarily? Like who I know you put a video out recently talking about who you work with, but what's an ideal client with you? What are the average people that you work with looking to achieve?
So a lot of people they've had a training age of something. They've all been doing something in the past. I don't really have, just with the circles I'm in, a lot of brand new people to fitness. So they've had like that couch to something experience already. And then now it's like, hey, I got stuck, or I potentially doesn't fit with my schedule anymore. They haven't really seen the results they want. So now it's, all right, I'm trying to then like almost not overhaul their life, but overhaul their week. Like, what does your week look like? Where are the gaps? Where are those efficiencies? Whether they're like, you know, like you said, a busy parent or just a regular parent. A lot of people commute to the city. So I have a lot of early morning people that are like, hey, I literally have 57 minutes to do this before I have to be at this ferry or train. So I really just kind of take those people and like they want to lose weight, but keep their muscle mass. So I want to make sure that I'm as efficient as possible with their nutrition, with their training, and making sure that all the buckets are filled in their week. So that pretty much covers it. I don't necessarily know if you're looking for something more specific.
No, that's totally fine. So let's take that avatar, someone who's looking, who's stuck. You know, what are the 3 things that you see most commonly that are keeping them from getting the progress that they want?
Too much random shit, too much cardio, and they don't track their food.
So basically everything that you would see on social media, a bunch of random shit, too much cardio, and you can eat whatever you want as long as you do these things.
Yes.
So let's get to the random shit, because, you know, part of the reason that I think you and I ended up kind of hitting it off or communicating is that, like, I keep an eye on what's going on, you know, in the area training wise. And, you know, there's not a ton of people that I'm like, I look at what they're doing training wise and I'm like, oh, like this guy gets it. Right. So, you were one of the few people that I was watching, you know, I don't know whether it came up in an Alpha Fit video or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, like this looks like it makes sense. Right. So, for us, obviously group fitness can get you so far. Right. And then at some point, the way I try to describe it when people are coming into us for intake is like, if you have a specific goal, you need a specific plan for the most part. Right. So what is again, we work with a wide variety of clients, but what's a general week? Like, hey, I'm a busy guy. I got 2 kids at home, let's say, and I'm looking to, put a schedule together for myself during the week. You know, what does that typically look like for one of your clients?
To be honest, if anything, I scale it back from what they're usually doing, because usually they're doing too much and there's really sporadic, like 6 days a week, killing myself and I'm super sore, I'm super tired. When it's in actuality, it's like, hey, let's just break it down Monday to Friday. We got strength training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, all full body days. They all have some sort of focus. So you're not overtraining, but we spread out the volume. So they're not sore. They can go on throughout their day. And then Tuesday, Thursday, way less cardio than they were doing, but something a little bit more punchier, right? So like 30-minute AMRAP or like something like that. So it's like you have something to do Monday to Friday. The weekends, go enjoy with your kids, your family, do whatever you need to do. And you're in and out with an hour.
Yep. So, what's your kind of selling point, I guess, when people are asking like, well, listen, why can't I just take, such and such class? Like, it doesn't matter the model. I don't care if it's Alpha Fit, Orange Theory, whatever. Yeah. Right. What are the limitations that you kind of see there that keep people stuck?
Well, it's like the rule of thirds when it comes to programming for classes, right? Like the Goldilocks effect. 30% of the people, it's too hard. 30% it's perfect. 30% it's too easy, right? So there's always that aspect where you never know what you're walking into that day, that random factor where you might see the same exercise on Monday and Thursday, but then you might not see it again for another 2 weeks, or there's maybe no level of like progressive overload or exposure to that training, right? We write 4 to 6 week training blocks. They know every Tuesday is the same thing for the next 4 to 6 weeks. So they have that progressive overload. And I think that's the biggest missing piece in a lot of those classes, as well as they're all time restrained, right? There's all some sort of like, you're in this position and doing this exercise for a small amount of time, then you're over here, then you're over here, then you're over here. So there's never like the ability to rest and then actually go heavier or focus on that attention to detail. So I feel like just the limitations of group fitness just limit everyone's progress in that regard, right? Like you go from the couch to class, then from class, then you need to find something specific for that goal. It can get the engine started, but it will never get you to that result.
Yeah. I think where people struggle is trying to understand that the biggest way to hide that you're not making any progress is just to keep doing different shit every week.
Yes.
Right. Like like if you don't do an exercise for another 4 or 6 weeks, it's really easy to hide that you're not actually getting any stronger or any leaner or any faster or whatever it is like, cause you're just picking different exercises all the time. We had an in-service the other day and I was like, guys, like, I don't care how fast you can deadlift and I don't care how heavy you can run, right? It makes no sense, right? And but that is the where things have kind of gone is that people are so focused on like workouts rather than training programs, right?
Yes.
Anybody anybody can make a really, really challenging workout, but it's how do you put something together that can keep you progressing to whatever your goal is for over a 4 to 6 week plan. That's the hard part. Cause you go on Instagram and you're like, dude, you see that workout that guy did? Like, I want to try that.
Yeah.
And then you do something like that. And then it's like, all right, well, yeah, you did it, but what are you going to do tomorrow?
Correct.
It's like no one's challenging the fact that you could do it, but it's like, but now if you're immobilized, like, because if every Monday you're going to do Murph, and it's like, well, you either really didn't do it that hard, which could be okay, or B, then what are you going to do for the rest of the week? So I think, getting people to understand the fact that they have to have some sort of training plan, or at least something that they're following, is kind of super important.
Yeah. I think that people look at, you can probably go down like a rabbit hole with like nomenclature, right? Like what's working out versus training, right? Like we can go down that. We can have a whole podcast just on that, I feel like. So I think most people just don't know the difference in that. And they're like, well, on Mondays I do chest. On Tuesdays I do back, right? Like what does that look like? Cool. Take a notebook and just write it down. Like if you did 135 for 10 reps this Monday, like next Monday, do 11, right? Or do 140. Right? Like any of that, I think people just miss that mark and just like stay in that comfort zone of like, either I'm going to do the same thing every week at the same weight, or again, they're like, I'm just going to, I won't say take the cop out, but like, I'm just going to have someone else tell me what to do. And it's just gonna be random.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a great question to cover. So let's just go over it now. Like, to you, what's the difference between working out and training?
Honestly, just like a plan and recording. Like anybody can just throw anything on the whiteboard and like have that workout where it's just, this is the one-time thing. I'm going to bust my ass and see what happens. Whereas like training, it's like you have a goal and you're working backwards, right? It's like a prescription, if you would. You have to find the minimum effective dose, what exercise plan, progression, regression will get them to where that needs to go. And then again, like now you have that systemic, like trackable and measurable task to get you to that end result. Where working out is just like, I'm getting sweaty and out of breath.
Yeah, to me, like, obviously a training program is made up of workouts, but there's a clear destination. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. I'm doing this, and then I'm going to hope to recover from that, and so that I can do this, right? Where the workout is just, it's only concerned about today. Is it hard? Is it challenging? Did I sweat? Or any of these other things that people chase, as indication of a good workout. And when you're chasing those things, it's usually at the expense of something else. So, what's the average age of someone that you work at? I'm just curious for this next question.
Usually at the moment around like 35 to 45.
Yeah.
I do have some outliers, but 35 to 45.
Yeah. So, and especially if they're of a higher training age, and for people that don't know what it means when we say training age, like obviously we have our chronological age, like I'm 40. Right. But your training age I might work with a 40-year-old who's never looked at a barbell before. So their training age is 1, right? Like, yes. So they're new. And so if they have a higher training age, they're probably past the point where every single week they're going to be smashing PRs and having the most intense workout. So the one thing that I like to try to get across to that demographic is like, look, if you have 3 workouts a month, let's say that's 12 workouts, right? Probably 2 of those workouts are going to be workouts where you were like, dude, that was amazing. I crushed it. The other workouts are kind of like, you come in, you do what you had to do and you move on. Yep. Right. Cause if you live in this world where like every single workout, like I'm going to like, I hate when I see this stuff on Instagram, like you got to treat every workout like it's your last. I'm like, well, if you treat it that way, one of them is going to be, because like that's fucking, you're going to, something's going to happen, and that is going to be your last workout. So, how do you work? It sounds like you work with a lot of like type A go-getter type people. Yes. How do you go about getting them to scale back and trust, like, hey, like, all right, I'm going to do what Joe says. Like, normally I do 10 sets, but he's telling me 3 sets, 8's fine. Like, what do you like to kind of go over with people to kind of get that buy-in?
So it's definitely a little bit trickier online, like just because I don't see them during their workout. So for that demographic, it's like, when we're going back and forth in messages, it's like, hey, how did that feel? And I was like, I feel great. I was like, okay, good. That's what we're chasing every single time. The feeling of not being beat up, not being sore all the time. There are going to be days where you have that. So that's kind of how you feel is really my metric to hammer home, right? Because that's the whole point of working out and training, right? Like you don't want to work out to like go backwards or to take away from the things you enjoy, right? Like you want to go coach your son's baseball game tonight, right? Like you can't throw the ball at that game or at practice, right? Like how is that going to help? How's that going to fulfill your life? But if you worked out too hard in the gym earlier that day, but if you dose it correctly or do the correct things, right, whatever correct is for that person, they can go and enjoy their life and actually be fulfilled. Those are the aspects I try to really hammer home with people. Because in the gym, even if you're there Monday to Friday, that's 5 hours out of the week. We got 160 something hours in a week. There's so much more in there that's fulfilling. That's more than just in those four walls.
Yeah, because the stuff that we're doing in the gym, at least for a majority of our clients, should support the thing,
yes,
not be the thing.
Correct.
Right. And I think a lot of our, because listen, they get excited. It's something new to them or they enjoy doing it, but getting them to understand that like not every day is the competition or is the contest. Save that for the contest.
Yeah.
Like, you work with people who are just starting to learn to lift heavier, or some kids that I'll coach who are getting into like powerlifting or whatever. And they're like, yeah, I just want to test today, make sure I could do it. I'm like, dude, that's what the day is for. Like that's why you have a meet or that's why you have a competition. I don't need to do people are running and we'll get into like Hyrox and stuff like that next, but like not every Friday can't be a sim, right? Like that's what the race is for.
Yes.
That's the whole point, right? So getting them to understand that, there's a dosage that allows you to get better, recover, and improve, and that's not 100%.
Correct.
I think it's super important to try to get that across to people because a lot of people that we work with are type A. They are like, I'm going to crush this workout, and it's like, great, I love that attitude, but like, have you gone home and like made food for yourself for the week? No, it's like, all right, how about we cut this 15-minute short then, and then you go home and like cook breakfast.
Yep.
So you mentioned things outside of the gym, right? We have the 5 hours in the gym. What are like your three or four things that you also look for from people outside of the gym that you're managing for them, from afar?
Overall, I always really want to hammer home water, right? Because again, a lot of people drink everything else but water, right? They're like, oh, I'm on my fourth. I know, same.
I'm just kidding.
People drive like, I've had like 4 coffees today. I'm like, did you have a water in between? No. Like, okay, let's just make sure we get in whatever those ounces are. Water, steps, and then sleep. Those are my big ones. Like if you can nail those down, no matter what things like throw your way, you can manage whatever goal you have, right? Because it's all about, like we invented the gym. We invented exercise. We didn't need that to be healthy back in the day. We would walk and hunt and grab everything we needed from the earth. So like we invented gyms to replace that since we don't have that as society. So if we can mimic those aspects in our day-to-day life, then we'll be on the right track.
Yeah. So if someone's struggling with one of those things, like what are some tips? I mean, some of them are easy, right? Like, hey, like getting your steps in, it's like, well, buy something that tracks your steps and get I always hate like when people are like, you got any tips for getting the steps in? And I'm like, yeah, walk. Like that's my tip. Like go for a walk. Like I don't know what strategy, I don't know what hack you're looking for to get 10,000 steps other than like, I mean, you could do the whole park further away and all that kind of stuff. But like at the end of the day, like if you're 4,000 steps short, like whether you park further away at the Whole Foods or not is not going to.
Correct.
Like you need to give yourself 20 minutes in the morning and go for a walk.
Yeah. Like I have those reminders set for a lot of people too. And it even says like 30 minutes outside, like if possible. Because I mean, granted, I know it's been cold and stuff, but like if you can get outside, like, and especially if you're working from home, I work with a lot of people who work from home. So they're like at their desk 8 hours, like straight. They sometimes can't get away. So it's like, hey, like let's set up a timer and let's like walk around your house or like your complex or get one of those like walking pads. Like even Hannah and I have one in the living room. So like pop up a desk on there and like we'll get our steps as we're taking a meeting or a call or something like that.
I know that was like a huge wake up call for me. Like when COVID first started and we were all at home, like, cause for me, it was never an issue to get 10,000 steps just because you're coaching, you're moving around.
Yep.
Like I think I could probably grade how good a coach somebody is without watching them coach. If I just said, hey, let me see your Apple Watch at the end of your shift. And like, if it says 3,000, like you stink or you don't care. If it says 15,000, at least I know you care. Like
Yes.
Because you're hustling around and you're moving. So that's a separate aside, but I think for me, it was like, I was like, damn, I'm like, here I am. I was like judging all these people like, cause I was younger at the time, whatever. And I'm like, this is really hard because I was doing sessions on Zoom and teaching classes on Zoom. And I would look up and it'd be 2:00 and it'd be like 400 steps. And I'm like, well, I didn't even work out yet. Now I got to work out and do that. So it's definitely something if you have a 9 to 5 or especially if you commute to that 9 to 5, because now you're looking at an hour on each end of it's the space in between the calls. Can you take that call while you walk?
Yes.
I know you have 15 minutes between calls, instead of doom scrolling or doom scroll while you walk then, right? Do whatever, but like being mindful about those gaps of time if you don't have an hour in the morning or an hour at night kind of thing.
Yeah, like without a doubt. And that's those reminders. Like we have technology everywhere, smartwatch, phone, computer, iPad, like whatever notifications you need. And I rely on those a lot with my clients too. Like same thing for like an evening routine. I have an alarm every day at 7:30. So like 7:30 at night, it literally says vitamins. So like take my vitamins, brush my teeth, make my breakfast for the next day, have that evening routine because I'm still up super early. So like having that reminder to get those 8 hours of sleep is huge. Like that time can change depending on the person's schedule, but those reminders are great. A little like reminder ping for like drink some water. Like, oh my God, I had this water on my desk the whole time, but I haven't touched it. Right. So, okay, cool. Every hour, maybe that goes off, and like those constant reminders that you can purposely put in for yourself actually help quite a bit, I think, throughout the day for people who work at a desk.
Sure. Yeah, because you just need something to break the cycle of what they're doing, because if it's one meeting to the next, and in between meetings I do this. So something that can kind of ping and go off. So what about sleep? Like how are you monitoring that with clients? Is it more just general feedback? And then if it's not going well, what are some things that you kind of recommend for improving that?
Yeah. So a lot of my clients have like some sort of smartwatch, or at least their phone. So like when their phone goes down, it at least gives them a window of when they went to bed versus when they woke up first thing in the morning, used it as their alarm to shut it off. So then from there, it just like tracks into the app, like goes from their health app into my app. So I'll be able to like see that if possible. But the evening routine is really big that I try to hammer home for all my clients to at least help them get more sleep. The hard part is sometimes people have a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep. So from there, it's like, does a noise machine work? Like a lot of people have theirs still from like when they had young kids. So it's like, now just move that into your room. Maybe.
I can hear my daughters in the next room. So I found that to be super helpful.
Exactly. Like we have a humidifier in the room. So like I can hear that going off, and like that helps me when my brain is racing. Simple breathing, like box breathing. Like, hey, I'm going to lay down, 4 seconds in, 4 second hold, 4 second out, 4 second hold. Do that. It's better than counting sheep. At some point you'll lose count of your breaths anyway, and then you'll gently, hopefully, fall back to sleep or fall asleep. So that's kind of like my big ones. If I need to, like we'll pull out like tart cherry juice before you go to bed, a consistent morning alarm, so that at least their body's starting to get into that consistency. Like, all right, if this is when I'm getting up, hopefully then from there, their bedtime also is a consistent time. So if they have that habit after like about a month, like going to bed at 10, waking up at 6, within those windows, their body kind of like adapts to that window already, so that by 9:30, they're like, why am I tired? So it kind of like naturally does that for us. Yeah.
And I know like, short of getting everybody's blood work done, which is still something I think they should do. Like I will not stay asleep without being restless if I'm not taking like some ZMA. Right?
Really?
Like
yeah.
If it's I'm terrible at remembering to take supplements. Like I'll take creatine for a few weeks and then I'm like, I forgot. Like just for stuff like that. But ZMA is one of the ones that I cannot, start to forget. Like one night, fine, because you're probably your stores are probably still topped off.
Yeah.
But like that's like the only thing I have on auto ship through Amazon.
Really?
It has to come, like it just knows when I run out by the dose. So anybody that's like struggling won't necessarily help you fall asleep, but will help stay asleep. And if you haven't taken it before, the fun part is you get to have some weird dreams the first couple.
Yes, you
nights.
do.
I find when I take it consistently, it levels out and that doesn't happen. But if I have stopped for a certain period of time and then I start, like the vividness of the
dude, it's like you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've never been I tried like low dose melatonin and things like that before.
Yeah. I never
and
did.
like I slept, but like I woke up and felt like I had drank like a fifth of Jack Daniels. Like it was like,
really?
Oh, that was a great sleep. But I woke up and felt like someone just beat the hell out of me. I think that's pretty common. Like I think they call it even like a melatonin hangover. And like, I didn't have the patience to try to like titrate the dose down to whatever it would be. I was like, it didn't work. So
especially if you're up early at that point, like whenever you started taking that, like I know for myself, I can't take any of that. So I'm up early. Like it's still in my system. Like my alarm goes off at 3:30 in the morning. Like I can't wake up that tired. So like ZMA has been big for me too.
Yeah. So like, I think the one thing that you touched on that I think is super important is getting used to trying to have that consistent bedtime.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're going to go in your room, fall asleep right at 9 o'clock. But the better you can get at like, hey, I go in, and even if you need to like read in bed in the beginning or something like that, to like my routine starts at this time, like it'll slowly get better. Most people just need to put their damn phone in another room or do something different. I switched over I didn't do this because of my phone, but it was because the alarm on my phone was too loud and it was like waking up like my daughter would wake up and go off. So now I have like one of these alarms that just like, it lights up. So it starts like really, really dim. And then like, so like if it needs to go off at 5 a.m. at like 4:45, the light turns on. And then like at 10 minutes to 5, it's a little bit brighter. But then like by 5 o'clock, like these little birds are chirping and there's like bright light.
It like mimics the sun, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like I don't know of any of the stuff like in terms of like, hey, how that works or whatever. But I know I wake up, it's not, and it's not this abrupt like, oh shit, like, oh, it's like, it's 4:45 or whatever time it is. Like it's a much smoother kind of wake up. So I've liked those kind of changes.
Hannah would love that because I have like my alarm is in the other room. Like I learned like from my dad, like he always had his alarm clock across the room. So you have to get out of bed to shut it off. So I physically have like the bell and hammer. Like it sounds like a fire alarm every day. Like
so maybe for Hannah's sake, switch over to one of those. You can just get it on Amazon. They got even wild ones. Like I saw one where it's like, it's literally like, so you'd hang it like where a ceiling fan is, and it's a plane that goes around, and you have to like shoot at it with like this like fictional gun for it to get it go off. I'm like, I don't know who to like. Apparently, someone bought it, but I remember seeing it. It was like pretty wild. But all right, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Yeah.
Right now, Hyrox is something that's all the rage. You have a program that just came out like a week ago, two weeks ago, Monday. Perfect. Yeah. 2 days ago. So. For the people who are listening to this who have no idea what Hyrox is, give us a brief intro and then let's get into talking about some of the training for that.
So it is a race that involves running, some cardio, other cardio events, and other strength events. So it is a 1K run, then you hop on the ski erg for 1,000 meters, you run again, push a sled, run again, pull a sled, run again, burpee broad jumps. I'm gonna stop saying running because then from burpee broad jumps you have the rower. From the row you have farmer's carry, then sandbag walking lunges, and then you end with wall balls, which is the squat, throw the ball up, hit a target, then you cross the line.
And then there's a 1K run between all of those.
Yes.
You finish with a 1K run as well, or when the wall ball is done, it's done?
Yes. You have like this little strip that you have to run, so that you just pretty much, once that ball hits the top, you sprint as far as you can to that finish line.
What do you think has made it like as popular as it is? Because like I saw it was like a business, I don't know if it was a podcast or an Instagram clip. They were talking about the revenue from it recently.
It's insane.
And I was like, these dudes are printing money.
Yeah.
They have like, it was like 100 something races, all with like 1,000 people, all at $200 a clip or whatever it is. And I was like doing the numbers in my head. I'm like, damn.
Yeah.
I'm like, and what do you think is the allure to it?
I think it's just, obviously it's new, right? So people are like, oh, I want to try that. So to me, I look at it as like what CrossFit was back in the day, where it's like, oh my God, there's this new thing that's a challenge that isn't like, I don't have to drive to a mountain and do this Spartan race that doesn't excite me, or climb a mountain outside. And I think that's the only other race. Like some people really love that Spartan aspect, but I think it just makes it more tangible. It's like, I can do these events. Like you can't, yes, if you go to a Spartan gym, you might be able to practice your spear throw, but like, oh wait, I ski at the gym already. I can do that. I already use the rower. I push a sled. So it makes it almost attainable, right? For lack of a better word.
And I think there's there's the allure of marketing something that was like, prepare for the unknown, right? Like, cause that was like, when you get to certain CrossFit events, I think CrossFit can be good and any fitness can be great, but like, there's also part of like, if you want to see who can really train for something, then let's define the event and all get ready for the same thing, right? Because if I were to show up to something and they were like, well, we have snatches from the floor, I'm like, well, dude, my shoulder, I'm not
doing that either.
Right? Like I'm out, right? So I'm DQ for that, DNF for that event, right? But with this, it's like, all right, no, I know this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then it gets back to the workouts versus training. Like, well, now we can train.
Yes.
Right? Because we have a definable event. I'm going to show up. It's not going to be raining. It's not going to be like, oh, well, actually, there's barbed wire today and the lake is frozen. So you're actually you're going to crawl on your hands and knees across this thing. Like all those things are great challenges, but they're more mental toughness than like, hey, can I change my physiology to do this?
Correct.
Right? Like, there's a difference between a task that just needs to be completed or something that we can compete at. Yeah. Right. So I think the allure was like, hey, I can measure myself against other people in my age, my demographic, and know exactly what the hell I'm getting into. So now let's go into the training for it, right? Because I think like most things, I'm interested in what motivates people.
Yep.
So I'm always curious when people who are like, I haven't worked out ever in my life. And then I saw this 30-mile Spartan race and I'm like, that shit I'm doing, that's what I want to do. Right. So what does it look like for, someone to get ready for one of these events? Because I think the misconception is they look at it and they're like, I got to get infinitely better at the ski, or I got to get so much better at the rowing, or any of these one particular events. And then I'm like, just understand it's still, how many Ks would it be running? Yeah. So it's still an 8K run. I'm like, have you run a 5K ever in your life? No. Okay. Like, well, we have to run, right? Like, so I defer out on some of those things, but where's your head go in terms of like putting together a well-structured program to prep someone for something like Hyrox?
So, I mean, it depends on the length. In the past, I've always talked about like 12 weeks. Like 12 weeks, like if you have a good base, right? Whether that's a cardiovascular base and a strength base, awesome. Because then from there, we're just going to turn that into sport specific. And I hate that phrase, but for Hyrox, it's appropriate because you can actually mimic this sport in the gym, unlike baseball, right? So from there, we just gear all that strength training more towards those events. And then from there, as it gets like about 8 weeks out, now we start working on speed. So now we're going to start playing around with the amount of volume of those events that you're going to be able to do. And then in the last 4 weeks, I always do like a 2-week taper. So in the last 4 weeks, I try to throw in like a simulation in there just to see like, all right, where are you at? Where do you feel comfortable? And then from there, it really just starts to get faster. So again, we just play with the volume. So we have more sets and reps as we start to build. And then as the race gets closer, we start dropping those sets and reps while increasing the speed and intensity of that work.
Yeah. So let's go over a couple of keywords for people that are listening that might not have an idea. When we talk about volume, we mean what?
The amount of, could be tonnage or work within that day, within that week.
Right. So if I'm lifting, I'm going to use easy numbers.
Yep.
If I'm bench pressing 100 pounds for 10 reps, that's 1,000 pounds of volume if I did one set, right? So ways of increasing that volume would be keep it at one set and do 12 reps, or keep it at 10 reps and add sets. Correct. All those are ways of increasing how much actual workload you're doing. When we talk about intensity, right, we're looking at absolute number. Like, are you running at this pace?
Yes.
Are you lifting this load, which is significantly heavier? The intensity can contribute to the volume, but not necessarily always. So I think that's just important for people to listen and try to understand.
Yes.
Right. Because the biggest mistake I think I see people make, and I'll ask you the same question, is like, they see this thing and the first thing that they do is like, well, Brian said it's an 8K run, so I'm gonna lace up my shoes and 10K tomorrow. Yeah. And they're like, my knees, my everything hurts. This sucks. And it's like, well, that probably wasn't a great strategy. So, what do you think is the biggest mistake that people make when they sign up for an event like Hyrox? Like
you said, they come out too hot and they think that they should be training harder than they actually need to. But then also at the same time, they only train those 9 events, right? Like the 8 stations and running, and that's all they do. When in actuality, there's a lot of other exercises that complement those same movements. So that's what I try to work on too. So like as the week goes on, it's like, no, you don't always have to do wall balls. We can do some thrusters. We can simply just do some squats. We can also just do some overhead press. Like all those things will help complement that, which a lot of people ignore. And then with the running, like we say it's an 8K race, it is on the track. But then on the inside, there's something called the rock zone. So you run on an oval like you would a normal track. Then you enter what they have in, like big banner, big arch. And then you run in, then you have to run to your event station. So and that's what a lot of people, like, especially in the beginning, they don't think of. They don't even know the rock zone exists. So when you come in, now you have to do that 8 times, finish your event, then you have to go out through the out arch. Now, again, you're also doing a farmer's carry. You're also doing walking lunges. You're covering distance in those events. So what I do is I work people, so like an 8K is 5 miles. I work people up through that training phase as like, again, the volume changes. I work them up to 8 miles. Because at the end of the race, if you like check your watch, like you can cover, depending on the location of the race, could be anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5 miles that day. That's like an easy thing that a lot of people overlook. Yeah, because I think if you don't have a training background in terms of like being a coach, you look at it like, well, that's the distance. Well, I'll just prepare for that distance. Correct. Right. But much better to be operating at 70% of your capacity than like right from the get operating at 100. So I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned and maybe hopefully put it into some simpler words for people, right? So we have sports specific. So let's use Hyrox. Sports specific then becomes any of those events, right? Skier, rower, wall ball, anything like that. Right. And then we're going to look at what we'll call GPP, which is general physical preparedness, which is the part that everybody wants to skip. Yes. Right. So if we were to make a pyramid, right, ideally your general physical fitness
should be at the bottom, the base, that should
Correct.
be wide. You
Huge.
should be able to lift, run, crawl, swing, hang,
Yep.
throw stuff, insert wide variety of things here. And then at the very, very tippy top should be all those events. The skier, that should be the top for this particular event, right?
Agreed. Yes.
Skiing and rowing could be GPP for a different sport, right? But
Yes.
if we're going to pick the sport of Hyrox, that goes at the top. So one thing that doesn't, I guess if I'm being honest, it frustrates me is like, is people feeling the need for a lot of specific work. And then we're like, hey, like how many push-ups can you do? And you're like, well, 2. And you're like, okay, like, so you're going to try to stack, their pyramid is upside down,
Yes.
right? They are piling a ton of training of all the specific things, skier, rower, wall balls, all that, all their workout is all that stuff, like you mentioned before, on top of a really, really tiny point down at the bottom of general. And then they're wondering why they're breaking down, why things hurt. So the way I describe it to our clients, I don't care what your secondary goal is, right? I mean, I do from a coaching standpoint, but
Yes.
meaning like you want to do a figure competition, a bikini competition, Hyrox, Spartan, run a half marathon or a marathon. That's totally fine. I need you to first be in shape enough to be 16 weeks out from that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's our base camp is like, hey, do you have enough general fitness to be able to sustain the work that it's going to take to do a 16-week program? Because as that intensity gets higher, if you're piling, it's like, it's like Legos or whatever. If I'm piling a ton of stuff on top of something that's very, very narrow at the bottom, shit breaks. So what do you think are some good, we could talk about this because this is the stuff I enjoy. Cause like,
Yes.
If I look up what a Division I linebacker should be able to hang clean, like I could just find a chart. But Joe from accounting, like I don't know like what Joe from accounting should hang clean or deadlift or how many pull-ups is good for him, right? So what are some things that you would like to see from your athletes? I'm not going to say before they start Hyrox training because you don't want to discourage anybody, but like what are some things that as a coach, like, hey, I'm looking for these markers before I'd say, hey, let's get into some of these specifics.
See, that's a hard one because like a lot of people already want the specifics or have already signed up by the time they come to me, right? So there's not like, I don't have that like, hey, you are ready. Because, and I will be honest, most of them are not ready, right? If they're like already one of my clients or if they've done this race a time or two before, like then they are. But most like Joe from accounting for sake, like probably not. So that's why I turned the 12-week program to 18 weeks because now I'm going to give you 2-3 week training phases all about increasing their base of running, all based on time. So like Tuesday, you got a 30-minute run. Thursday, you're doing it again. Next week, 35, right? And we're just slowly building our way up. And then from there, they're lifting on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, nice, smooth and simple, focusing on triple extension, right? Like we want that hip, knee, and ankle extension. So we want to be able to be explosive because that's going to carry over to the running and all the other events that they're going to have that day, that race day. So things like cleans, sometimes some snatches, lots of trap bar deadlifts, like those are going to be lots of plyometrics as well, stuff people have never done before. Because again, like running is jumping. So if you don't jump, right, like how are you going to be able to cover the distance you've never covered before safely? So that's kind of how I look at it. Like, can we make those tissues safe early? If they can be explosive and fast twitch as well, fantastic. Then we can get into those race specific stuff. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Like, cause I try to look at it as like, hey, like, did you ever play like video games as a kid?
Yeah, not
So,
many,
like,
but yeah.
It's like, when you create your own character, like in Madden.
Yes.
And like, you could like, you only have so many numbers that you can move up and like, all right, you make speed 100, but then you're not trucking anybody. Right.
Yeah.
And you have to play around with those numbers. I look at it that way as like, hey, like if we want to get a better athlete, I don't care what the sport is. If any of these general numbers are down around 0, your overall rating, like your Madden rating is going to go up higher by getting better at these things that are 0s than adding 5 more to this thing that's at 85 or 90.
Correct.
Right. So like your example, let's use wall balls as the exercise.
Yep.
Right. Hey, like, and this is if I was talking to someone as a client, not you obviously, but I'm like, hey, like, so what's a wall ball? Like, okay, describe it to me. And I would have them try to do that. Like, well, you basically squat all the way down to a certain depth. You stand up as explosively as you can and you heave a ball to a target. Okay. What do you front squat right now? I don't even think I could do the bar. Like I can't do 20 bodyweight squats. So it would stand to reason that if maybe we could get up to doing like, I'm talking modest goals, like half your body weight for a set of 10 in front squat, that doing that with a 14-pound ball or whatever the weight is would be markedly easier. Like even if you didn't know what you were doing, like even if your technique with wall balls stunk, right? And they're like, oh, that makes sense. Well, yeah, that's why we need to do this strength work. That's why we need to do that, because I can respect that you kind of get, I'm assuming anyway, that you get stuck sometimes, right? Because you do get this person who signed up for a 16-week thing.
Yep.
And there's a lot of buttons that haven't, or boxes that may not have been checked ahead of time.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, I don't really have a choice right now. We have 16 weeks. So we're just gonna do the best we can. And because getting them to understand that, hey, there are some exercises, there are some techniques that I would love to use, but we got 16 weeks. I can't be teaching you how to hang snatch for the next 3 weeks because we're not gonna get any value out of that. Like, so we're just doing box jumps, or we're just gonna do like an overhead med ball throw because I can teach anybody that, like if you got the space to do it.
Yeah. And like my goal too, right? Like I want sustainability out of all things, right? Like kind of how you said before, like my goal is to make you a better human being. Then that secondary goal is like, that will come and go as your life goes on, right? So like sign up for this race, then we stop, sign up for another race, then we stop. So as long as I can keep people healthy is really my goal there. So like sometimes it's just, it is what it is, homie. Like we got to do this. Okay, that's good enough. Now let's move on, right? Like, cause you got to get closer to the race. Like taking that push-up that you mentioned before, like you can't do 2 push-ups. Well, how many burpee broad jumps are you going to have to do to cover that distance? Yeah. Right? The top of that burpee every single time is a push-up. Like you can modify and adjust it as you need to, but like at the end of the day, let's do more push-ups. Let's do more things that are going to break down the movements to make the movements better. Cause like we can kind of go down a rabbit hole. I'm going to try not to here. Like moving as a whole unit, like the thinking of like the FMS and like thinking of functional movements, we're only as good as those individual pieces, right? So these movements in the race are the same thing. Like if your squat depth isn't good enough because your hips and your low back are shit, well, let's also improve your hips and your low back. Hopefully it gets better. If not, all right, grab a bucket once you get there. Like, what do you mean? Like, okay, so the bucket, if you can't get below parallel with your hips at the wall ball station, they literally have like a Home Depot paint bucket. Flip it over, you sit on the bucket, so then the judge knows you're hitting the same depth. So like some people coming in, like I coach, is like, when you get in there, just grab the bucket. Like that's already higher than parallel for you. So good job. Like now you have less range to go. Use the bucket, and then from there you can rock and roll. So there's ways around that. You just have to find those and navigate those waters.
Yeah, because the mobility piece is big for a lot of people too. You know, just being honest, usually not too much for the women, but for a lot of the guys that want to do it, like it's like, hey, like you're trying to drive your car with the emergency brake on, right? Like we can get stronger, but like sometimes the way to make this thing, because like you're talking about in Hyrox, it's not even necessarily about completing the task. It's about what level of exertion did you need to use to do that task? So it's like, if you had to drive a mile, it'd probably be easier to do that without your emergency brake on, right? Like, so yeah, like if you're going to have to do 100 squats to this depth, it'd probably be nice if your hips moved a little bit easier. So you're not grinding things down or dealing with pain or fighting against yourself just from a movement restriction standpoint.
Yeah. And so, like almost every aspect of that race can be looked at that way. There's some way to make it more efficient, but like what's efficient for that person is the most important aspect. Because when you talk to people like the very competitive Hyrox athletes, yes, they're still moving pretty quickly on the stations and on the zones, but like a lot of people look at that as a recovery. This is like a running race for the most part. Sure. So like if you can then conserve energy, and that's why the race is in the order it is. Everyone's getting too excited on the first run. Everyone's going to come out hot and happy. Then I'm going to see the ski and they're like, awesome, great. Now I feel good. I'm excited. There's a crowd around. I'm going to go too quick. Now you're inverted, right? Your heart rate's already up in general. Now it's just going to keep going up and be harder for you to recover. And then you immediately have to go into a heavy sled. That's one of the most demanding things that we can do in our body ever, and create a shitload of lactic acid and fatigue. And that's only your second station, right? Like you still have so much more of the race to go and run. So it's all about how fast can you clear that lactic acid and clear that fatigue and make it a manageable pace for yourself. So like, again, a lot of the more competitive racers say when you get to the rower at zone 5, that's when the race starts. So that's like, let's just get through the ski. Let's get through the sled. Let's get through the burpee broad jumps. Now I can kind of hit the gas. And then from that rower, it's like, all right, cool. Now it's game time.
Yeah, it's like the cliche thing in a lot of sports. It's like, hey, no one's winning the Hyrox in those first couple.
Correct.
But there's a lot of people that have lost.
Oh, yeah, so many.
They've lost it because like if you come out, I don't care if it's a regular marathon or half marathon, any race, if you come out way too hot, it's not easy. You're not just going to like, oh, I'm good now. Yep. Right. Like you're shot. And then even just from a mental standpoint, you start to talk to yourself of like, I should be doing this. I'm not there. Or like I'm way now all the negative kind of mental talk kind of chips in too. So with this being popular, one of the questions that we got when I was looking for questions earlier was like, what's a good spacing, right? Because I think people do one of these Hyroxes and they're like, that was the most amazing thing in my life. I'm going to do another one. And like, when? You're like, 2 weeks, I'm going to Toronto. Oh. And you're like, all right, well, like, dude, like that's not what we want to do here. So how do people manage like when they have these little, again, my background, powerlifting, not endurance events, but like at most you maybe did 3 meets a year.
Yep.
Right? Like top, some people would do 4, depending if they were using one as like a tune-up. They weren't actually going to try and compete in that one. So how do people manage the schedule of like, hey, I have this Hyrox on this date, but my buddies are doing this DECA thing on the other day, like how do they kind of manage that so they don't like essentially get hurt or end up doing too much?
Like the season's really long, man. The season's like a professional season. It starts in October and goes all the way to like June, right? That's like professional basketball almost. So like you have opportunity, you don't have to cram them all in and you always have the next year. So I always tell people like, if you want to do one in the fall, awesome. Then you can do another one like early spring or late spring. Like if you want to do more than that, more than likely you're not going to get a good enough training block in between those races to improve, right? Because then from there you have to then, after the race, you've just given maximal effort, right? Or at least you should have. So then from there we have to then down-regulate, understand the recovery for that next week. So that's already a week off the block there, depending on your training age, could be 2 weeks. Then it's like, all right, we need another, again, ideally I would love like 12 weeks before we can get into that like prep. But if you just finished a race, you can probably keep a lot of that endurance and those adaptations. It's really just now, how can we like fine tune some of your mechanics? So at least like another 8 weeks. So like 3 races a season, I would say would be the ideal number. Like again, if you're looking at the people who podium, they space theirs out, or they'll go to like Europe because they know that that date is better for than their next race in the States. So like 3 a year in a season max, I would say. Anything above that, you're just running into like, you're just spinning your wheels.
Let's get into talking about the Hyrox training. And one of the questions that we got is, how do we go about fueling for Hyrox? Like how do I make sure that I have enough energy to complete this event?
So I always like, heat times vary, right? So they almost always, the men's singles and men's doubles go earlier in the morning and the women are kind of pushed back later. So it all kind of depends on your heat time. But for the most part, I tell people to have a normal breakfast, right? Like whatever that is for them, whatever they feel good in their stomach, rock and roll with that. And then from about like, again, depending on the time you go, I look at like a 90-minute window. So like that hour and a half mark before your race, like can you have something light, right? Like whether that's simple peanut butter and jelly sandwich, can you have something that's digestible? Because then as it gets closer, that 45-minute mark right before you start warming up, that's when it's like, can you have that half a banana? Can you have potentially like a stroop-off, or like maybe if you want like a simple gel beforehand, like that's good just to have some more carbohydrates in, some like to kind of boost those glucose stores right before you get into the race. Because you're still gonna have that pre-race nerves. You're gonna go through some while you're doing your warm-up and your like station work. You're gonna start using some of that energy. So then from there, you're good right up until race time. As you go on throughout the race, this is what a lot of people neglect, is fueling on the race or in the race. So like if you like those, like I always use the honey stinger gels, like they pretty much are honey, but I always tell people you need 3 of them, because no matter where they fall, usually around like that 45, 50-minute mark, like that's when we start to see those glucose numbers drop. Like, all right, we need something. That's usually roughly around that station 5, like that row station. So whether you have that before it, on the rower, like if your partner's going, if you are partnered up, or like once you're off that rower on that run, have a gel, awesome. Because then from there, everything goes off of time, not based off of your effort. So by the time you hit that 60-minute mark, that's when you need another one of those gels. You want to think about every 20 minutes after that. So from there, wherever that 60-minute mark is, that's when you have another one. Average people usually fall in that like hour 20 to hour 30 for race completion. So then from there, pretty much once you're done with those walking lunges, that's when you want to have another one right before you get into that next run or your last run and the wall balls. So usually 3 gels will cover it. That's usually like 300 calories. It's usually 75 grams of carbohydrates. Usually does the trick for most people. Some people like to chews, like those little like running shoes. They'll just pop it in their mouth and they'll have that a little bit longer. So if that is a race strategy, like your fueling times might vary a little bit, but it's also, again, you have to carry it. No one on the sidelines can give it to you. Like if you're in the competitive bracket, right? If you're in the open division and you're kind of going through it, I don't think a judge is really going to give you a hard time if someone like hands you something. But again, you never know who's watching. So anything that you can carry on you, that you can have in your pocket, you're not going to lose. I've seen people put it in their sports bra, some people put it in their sock. Whatever gets the job done is what'll work.
Cool. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that people mess up is like they always like the day before the race or the morning of, like they have something completely different than they've ever eaten before. And it's like, well, I want to eat something healthy. I'm like, what'd you have for breakfast? I had like some salmon and some brown rice. I'm like, well, that's going to take a long time to digest. So let me know how you feel out there. People mistake, like at that point, it's what is going to be the most easily digestible thing that you can have so that your body can absorb it. Like we want exactly the opposite of what we would tell you to normally have at any other time. Like something that has a ton of fiber and is slower digesting. We want something that is almost zero fiber and goes straight to your bloodstream so that you're ready to go. So the question came up as well when it comes to, I guess, into regards of training or when you're running your sims, how much are you using heart rates to drive any of that? Are you using that data? Is that something that's important, or is it something that you kind of just look at afterwards?
I always look at it afterwards if people have that, right? Like, so if people don't have a chest strap, right, it's going to be skewed unless you have a chest strap heart rate monitor, right? Like your watch will always be wrong. I don't give a shit who's talking to me. The heart rate is the monitor on the chest will be the only accurate one. Even that there has some variability. So unless you're giving me that data, I don't want to say I don't care, but it's still good things to look at because I'm not really working with people that are trying to go from like second place on the podium to first, right? I'm working with people who want to do this with Betty Sue for a nice challenge for their first time ever, or like second or third time. So from there, it's like, cool, let's look at that data after. Where did your fatigue come into play? How did you feel? And then where was your heart rate in that sim potentially of like, where was that exertion? Where was that wall that you hit? Okay, what time was that? Then we can kind of start looking at your workouts and see if we can play around with your pacing a little bit or your efficiency. Like could be a form thing. Could be simply as over gripping the rower and having a higher stroke rate instead of actually being calmer, having a lower stroke rate with more volume and power behind that. So there's a lot of variabilities, but I don't necessarily look at heart rate in the workout or like to detail. As long as you're really not shooting up to zone 4 or zone 5 too early, then I'm gonna be pretty happy. Like I want you in zone 3, zone 4, almost that whole race. If you ever get to zone 5 before you get to the wall balls, that's when it's an issue. Yeah,
because there's only, I think the biggest mistake that people make, I think, with heart rate training is that they let it dictate everything that they do, right?
Yes.
It's like at some point, like the race is the race. You have to do the things, like, and especially with training, if you're only giving yourself 16 weeks and you're coming from a position of never doing this before, like those adaptations take a decent amount of time.
Yes.
Right. Like everybody's like, well, I listened to a Peter Attia podcast and he said zone 2 is the way. I'm like, yeah, to live longer, not to win Hyrox, or to survive an hour and a half long, grueling, intense race. Like you can't, people make the mistake with nutrition. People make the mistake with training. They take like what they like to hear from all these different aspects of things that they've heard, and then they put them in together into one big thing that makes no fucking sense. That confirmation bias, and man. I like what I like. Well, I like this guy because he said cardio could be a little bit easier. And I like this guy because he said my training could be short and efficient if I do it this way. And it's like, so now you have a 5-minute zone 2 workout, like instead of like, and like, that's not how this works. No. The only time that I'm using heart rates is, again, if it's for an event-based thing, we'll look at like, how do we dose it, right? Because the way I'll try to explain it to someone is like some of the testing for some of the people that I'll work with and like, hey, all right, if they have to have the chest strap monitor, because the only time I see a watch really work is if you were going out for like an hour-long run and it has a long runway to start to try to average out where you're at. Then if I looked at my chest strap and watch, it's like comparable. But if you're doing anything where you need real-time data, it's way too lagged to catch up. And you're like dying and it doesn't even catch up that your heart rate's where it needs to be. So the way that we'd go about it is like, hey, it's like any other medication, right? We want to dose it up until the point of where there are some negative adaptations and then back off. Yep. So what does that look like? All right, take your competition wall ball and I want you to put your heart rate monitor on. I want you to do wall balls until you get up to about 80, 85% max heart rate. And then I want you to just stand there.
Yep.
Not the most exciting training in the world.
No.
But what I want to see is like, hey, all right, week 1, hey, I did 10 wall balls and my heart rate was at 85%. Like, we got work to do.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Now I want you to, and we're going to do this for 40 minutes. And there's different ways to get more creative. You can mix the exercises, but the idea is like, how much of that wall ball is it taking for you to get up to red line, right? And then we back off. So week 1, you might see I did 10 wall balls and then I had to rest. And then when your heart rate gets back down to about 60, 65, start your wall balls again. I got 10, I got 10, I got 7, I got 6, whatever. And over a course of 30 minutes, how many wall balls did you get? I got 87, whatever. I'm just making up numbers.
Yep.
And then what we want to see is like, if you continue to do that, what you'll see is like week 2, it'll be like, I got 12, I got 12, and I got 10. Now we actually know that your system is adapting to your training, right? Because if I said, hey, Joe, do 10 this week and then do 12 next, while that's good for, like you mentioned earlier, with like running volume and stuff like that, like we have to chip away at it that way.
Yeah.
Mentally tough people, like by the end, they'll just go, I did 100 wall balls today. And it's like, well, yeah, but you were at 180 beats per minute doing it. Like that, to recover from that now is going to be, a monster problem, right? So the way that I look at it is like, how much dose can we take right up to the point of where those negative adaptations might take place, and then we back off. And that's a really good way that I've found with people to see like how they can increase the ease of what they're doing, right? This is like from like the quick and the dead with Pavel, like that kind of thing. Like you do 10 as hard as you can kettlebell swings, but don't let your heart rate get up to a certain point, put the bell down, do it again.
Yep.
And now you'll start to see, well, now I can do 12 before my heart rate gets to that. And suddenly like, hey, I just ripped off 25 wall balls before my heart rate even approached 85%. And like, well, that's training. Right. Yeah. Whereas if I just said, just keep doing as many as you can, mentally tough people will just be like, their knees are going to be collapsing. The ball's going to be hitting them in the head.
Yes. And
they'll get it done because they're competitors. They're type A. They want to win. But I try to explain to them, like, I don't know that you actually got any better. Right. If I tell you to do this at a certain heart rate and the amount so you're going to rev the engine at the same RPMs, and now you covered a further distance or you got more reps done, I know that you're more efficient.
Yes.
Right. So that's one of the ways that I think people can kind of experiment and see where they're at with some of those events and start to ascertain their strengths and weaknesses. And if you could do 75 wall balls before your heart rate gets to 85%, we could probably spend less time there. If you take one tug of the ski erg and you're at 90, well, there's something there.
Yeah.
Right. So I look at it more of as like an information gathering tool than anything telling me anything about the workout.
Yes. Yeah. And like for the people that don't have the ability to measure these things, and like that's a lot of my clients, they don't have a chest strap, or even some don't have they'll have an Apple Watch, but it doesn't give the same data like a Garmin would. Mm-hmm. So I always talk about like simple talk test and then RPE scale of 1 to 10. So like you did this workout. When did you start to feel like you lost your breath? When did you start to feel like that became like an 8 or a 9 difficulty? Awesome. Take a note of that, because then when you do that later in the future, like, can we push that 8 or 9 feeling back a few minutes, right? Or a few intervals later. So like, that's kind of how I look at it with a lot of my clients, just from a logistical standpoint.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think anybody, like, it's certainly not a necessity. I think the important thing is just you have something like that in your training that gives you a little bit of buffer to your own physiology, rather than just like the more and more kind of mentality. All right. So for the people that are outside of Hyrox or aren't ready to start training that, let's just talk regular training. What's your philosophy on training, period? Like, what does good training look like to you?
Good training, like what we talked about earlier, is like GPP, right? Can you walk, run? Can you squat? Can you pull? Can you press? Can you throw? Can you carry? Can you lunge, right? Like, if you can hit those benchmarks evenly throughout the week, awesome. And then the only other caveat that I always put in there, just because single leg training to me is hugely important for all things breathing and gait mechanics wise. So like when you're walking around and going through your day to day. So I always like to add in, can you do single leg exercises within that? So if you're checking those boxes from a Monday to Friday basis, like, then you're okay. If you're only doing a barbell back squat, then you're missing so much. If you're only doing a barbell bench press, you're missing so much. So let's try to like write down and track and measure what people are doing. And if you can then tell me that you're checking all those boxes, awesome.
Yeah. I think the only thing I would even add is like, for me, it's getting people to understand and to manage the gaps between those things, right? Stealing that from Dan John is like, good training becomes about managing gaps and that making sure that all of these components support each other, right? Okay. If you're a power lifter, then I really care about how much you can squat, bench, and deadlift. Fair. If you're a Hyrox competitor, I really care about your Hyrox time or how well you can run, right? For the average client who might not be doing any of those things, like, I don't care if you could deadlift 500, 600 pounds if your heart rate is 170 going up the steps.
Yes.
I also don't care if you can, run 10 miles, but you cannot deadlift your body weight. All of those are of equal amount of being in disproportion of one another if I'm looking at how I'm going to manage someone's training, right? So again, great. You can bench 315, but if you can't reach, if it hurts to put your shirt on, then unless your competition is to bench, then I don't know how much value that's really bringing to you. Yeah. So, the only way I would kind of piece all of what you said together is to also just make sure that those things are all, for lack of a better word, playing nice with each other. Like, they're not at the expense of each other.
Yes.
I don't want to increase my bench press at the expense of my cardiovascular fitness. I don't want to try to max out my cardiovascular fitness at the expense of my joint mobility because I'm only running or something like that. So that's where I try to help people kind of balance out their program and not get too heavily weighted into one thing and try to put that all together.
Yeah, because we want people to be able to move well in order to move often, to be able to look good and feel good, right? Like, that's the end all be all. How can we make something enjoyable and take that apprehension away? Because again, if something hurts, you're going to do it less. So we can improve the quality of that by balancing the rest of your movement out and balancing your training and the dosage out. At the end of the day, you're going to be able to do this when you're 60, 65, 70, and so on.
Yep. So one last question, and I wish I would have been smart enough to ask this question to all the other guests, but my wife brought it up. I want to end with, since it is the To Be Fit podcast, the question I want to ask is what does being to be fit mean to you? What does being fit mean to you?
I want you to be able to say yes to everything, right? I'll just take the Little Silver 5K as an example, right? You have an elementary school kid, that's their PTO fundraiser every year. I don't care if you are a runner or not, you should be able to say yes to that event. You're going on vacation up to the Catskills or something, and you're want to do this hike. You should say yes. You shouldn't have to say no or think or delay on whatever that activity is, right? Your kids, again, I'll use the baseball example, your kids are getting older and you have to throw that ball to them as they get off the tee. Can you throw that ball? Can you be the dad to step in as a coach and help? Your answer should almost always be yes.
Yep. I can't agree more. It's what we talked about before, getting clients to understand that having all these other specific high-end goals are great, but my goal is for you to be in good enough shape so that you are 12 to 16 weeks out from any of those events, which kind of touches on that as well. So listen, I think you and I can talk training probably for hours, but I think this is a good place to wrap it up. We covered most of the stuff that we want to talk about. So for people looking to find more information about, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis or what you're doing with Sully Training Systems, where can they find you?
Instagram, it's the easiest, Sully's Training Systems, or Coach Joe Sully. Either one of those work.
Perfect, man. Until next time, appreciate you.
Thank you, brother.
Thanks.